Hello everyone, and welcome to Books Undone. I'm your host, Livia J. Elliot, and today I have something new for you, the first guest talk of the podcast. In this series, I will invite authors, reviewers, booktubers, and bookstagrammers to join me on deep dives of different books and stories, from short fiction, like today, to full novels. So without further ado, I will let my guests introduce themselves. Varsha from Reading by the Rainy Mountain.
Hi, my name is Varsha. I have a YouTube channel called Reading by the Rainy Mountain. It's called that because my name Varsha means rain in a lot of Indian languages. I love to talk about books on the channel and do a lot of book discussions.
José from Amazing Worlds.
Hi, I'm José. I run the small José's Amazing Worlds YouTube channel, and my name is not half as exciting as Varsha's, but I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
And Susana Imáginario, author of Wyrd and booktuber.
Hello, my name is Susana Imáginario. I write mythological slipstream, and I run a YouTube channel called Den of the Wyrd.
Thank you all for joining me, and we are discussing House Taken Over by Julio Cortazar. Now, before starting, let me do the usual disclaimers. First, there are spoilers in this podcast, so please be aware of it. Second, as usual, what you will hear is our subjective interpretation of this short story, so you are allowed and entitled to disagree and differ. Third, House Taken Over has a political interpretation within Argentina, but we will not dive into it. This short story is so allegorical, it can be read in multiple ways, and that's what you will find here. As a bit of a trivia before starting, Julio Cortazar was an Argentine writer, and the short story House Taken Over was originally published in 1946 in a literary magazine edited by Jorge Luis Borges, who is considered one of the fundamental authors of slipstream literature. Putting a genre to House Taken Over has proven difficult over the years, and many reviewers, podcasters, and literature students classified it from fantasy to psychological fiction and even magical realism. With that said, let me ask you the first question. What do you think of the siblings' obsession with cleaning up the house? Their entire routine seems to be adjusted around cleaning the house.
I found that quite bizarre, and but then towards the end, it says something about the environment, that it gathers a lot of dust. I've never been to Argentina, I don't know, so I figured that was, that there's a lot of dust. Where I come from, the Algarve, we have to dust constantly because it's by the sea and it's quite dry and there's always dust. You clean, the next day there's dust. And my grandmother and my great aunt, they spent a lot of time dusting. So I figured it was a similar thing.
Everything goes around it, and they clean every day. Like the whole routine is start in the morning, clean during the whole morning, cook, then leave after that. And if they are cleaning so much, where the dust comes from, that's the question.
They did have a statement about, which I'll say I didn't fully understand, that the city is clean, but the dust comes from its people. I did wonder what that meant. That I thought that was a curious way to phrase it. Yeah, it felt like they're fighting entropy in a way, but how is the entropy happening? And they had a very fixed routine for their lives. They weren't even working jobs apparently. They were knitting and then indulging, if that's the right word to use here, I don't know that it is, in their hobbies. And meanwhile, the house is falling apart around them and they have to clean every day. Honestly, I didn't think too much of the fact that they clean because it opens with the fact that the house is spacious and that it takes a lot of time to clean. The way it was described, that it could take 8 people. 8 people could live in it and not run into each other at all. I almost thought they go through one room a day or something like that. And then they finish and then they start over. It felt almost like that might be it. I think that's the explanation I subconsciously gave myself for why they spent so long cleaning every day. But then later it became clear that they cleaned their entire area when, maybe we'll talk about that when we get to that bit. But yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I've no idea, because not knowing what the intention of the story was, the interpretation is obviously subjective. I don't know if it simply was an attempt by Cortázar to create a sense of unease, because as you read the story, there are different levels of weird going on, like everything is weird. The fact that our brother and sister are living together in their 40s or whatever it is, that's weird. The fact that they don't leave the house, it's weird. Then you got these things taking over the house. Well, what is that? That's weird. And in the end, they don't escape. They simply just lock the house and leave the house. They don't sell it. They just leave. Everything is weird, or gets weirder and weirder. And you leave the story with a sense of unease, not having been told anything, and it's very open to interpretation. But I don't know whether the intent was simply to create unease and leave it, as a psychological thriller, or really there is a much deeper metaphorical meaning behind.
That's quite interesting, especially because the noises are such an important element, as you said. And the first time I read the story many years ago, I didn't catch this detail, but on reread, I realized that both characters, they actually know what the noises are. The brother actually goes in and says, I had to shut the door to the passage. They have taken over the back part. And she answers, you're sure? And it reads as if they know. They know what the noises are, kind of like they were expecting it to come in, but they don't do anything except looking out in half of the house, right? So what do you think the noises are?
Could be a variety of things, right? Like Jose said, there are some weird and bizarre interpretations of it. It could be, and you're right. I did notice that it said they acted like this was something they encountered before. Maybe they've already taken over parts of the house. It's not like this is a brand new invasion. Whatever the noises are, it seems like they already exist in the house, and they and their presence is expanding. Yeah, it could be ghosts, for instance, or it could be I don't know, some abusive people that they don't want to fight against. Or, and I know we said we don't want to get political, so without discussing specifically Argentina's political situation, what it felt most to me like was an invasion into a country or a region, and how people have to fight against that and fight a new regime, or fight an army that might be invading and become refugees or whatever. That's the metaphor that I thought might best resemble this.
I actually had a different read on the noises, especially because it said that they have the house divided in half with this big oak door, and in that back part they only have things from their parents, which are long deceased. Kind of like the noises come in from the back to the front, and I always read them as those things of our past that we just better let bury, and away from it. And suddenly they creep over and they come in closer because we have to deal with them. So, and the siblings don't deal with them. So that's why they rather run away from the past. So the noises will be, in that case, trauma from the past oppression, and they are just running away from it rather than dealing with it. The dust in that case could be just how that trauma or whatever affects your daily life, and it stains everything because it comes from, it's undealt with.
That does sound like a great interpretation too. Almost like sometimes when you experience trauma, you do things like, I know some people who clean a lot because they are dealing with depression or something. So that I love that interpretation. Actually, that sounds really cool.
I interpret it more. I don't usually jump to the supernatural, and as an aversion, that there is an element of almost disgust rather than fear. And I guess that ties in with the cleaning. They want the house spotless clean. But towards the end, when Irene lost her yard and goes under the door, and she loved knitting, her life was all about knitting. And when she sees that that it's on the other side of the door, she just drops it without another look, without a second thought, without regretting it. And it kind of read like a disgust reaction to it. Now my knitting is contaminated, it's taken over by whatever is on that side. And that was that. Such a radical reaction. So I think, there was an element of visceral disgust, aversion to whatever was on the other side, rather than fear.
In the same scene, after she loses the yarn, brother says that he left, I think, 10,000 pesos on the other side. And by that time, so this is set post World War II, that's a lot of money. And he just leaves it there and doesn't care about it. It does feel, as you say, Susana, everything that is on the other side is contaminated. It made me think, when you were speaking about my own interpretation of if this is traumas, many times survivors will want nothing to do with things, with objects that were not related, but were somehow part of the past. Like even if they are clothes or a house or a city, they won't want to come back. It brings me to another scene in which, after closing the oak door, they start looking for things, and they know they left it on the other side of the house, but they still ask each other, it's not here. And they are described as, having been so somber about losing that on the other side of the house, but they never attempt to go back and retrieve it.
In that matter of that issue, there's that thing of acceptance. They're not doing anything to stop whatever is happening. Oh, they've taken over whatever part of the house, then all right, okay. And even at the beginning of the story, they're taking for granted that the house is going to get bought or sold, and they're going to build a block of flats instead. Like, there's just some inevitability that they're not even fighting against. And then even the way the story ends, which goes against the initial premise that the house was going to get sold, they simply lock it and walk away. I don't know if allowing is the right word, but they're just passively accepting everything that is happening. And it's easier to walk away than to face whatever these spirits or, I don't know, aliens or whatever it is that is taking over the house. That's probably another metaphor, isn't it? The everything, the locking, the walking away. And it's a fairly glum, it's a fairly sort of nihilist, I don't know if it's nihilistic, but it's a fairly sad state of affairs that it's just easier to walk away from your issues, whatever they may be, than to face them and just get pushed out of your life.
At the start of the book, as you said, Jose, they are mourning the fact that the house will be eventually sold for the bricks. And at the end, he just throws a keys and says, like, poor bastard, the one that actually takes the house and the house is taken over. And it's like a complete opposite reaction. At the start, they wanted to keep the house, and at the end, they are just like, take it. I'm sorry for the soul that actually gets it.
Yeah, it felt like they were protecting other people from the house by locking it. I didn't notice. I was looking at it again now when we were talking about it. That ending was really interesting. It's not just their demons. It might affect others too. And to your point, Jose, I think they also did not do anything to prevent it. I didn't get the impression that they know this is something that happens. So they didn't like lock off or prevent anything from taking over whatever it was. It felt like it had a power of its own and they couldn't do anything to prevent it, or they didn't seem to try. I don't know if they've given up now or if they never did try.
What you said, Varsha, is that they didn't do anything to prevent it. It made me think of, generations. Like sometimes we tend to blame boomers for a lot of things that happened after. And they had a specific attitude, and that actually carried over. And if you go through every generation, each of us actually had an attitude, and that will carry over as well. So the noises could also be the consequences of their parents' generations and what they did coming in at the house is the current state of the art.
Yeah.
Now, mentioning that, do you think the house is a character?
Because wasn't Cortazar one of the biggest translators of Edgar Allan Poe into the Spanish language? I think he did a lot of work there. And there is, echoes of the fall of the House of Usher, now that we had the Netflix show and all the stuff. And it's also reflected in H.P. Lovecraft's work, this whole thing about having some family curse that is unescapable, that some sort of inherited curse that you cannot escape. And I think you can see that in Poe's works, you can see that in Lovecraft's work, and maybe here there's echoes of that there is something that we carry from our ancestors that we can't escape or fight against, and maybe there's a similarity there.
It felt to me like the house represented a way of life that's being protected. I mean, it's both explicit in what they're doing day to day, but also what we talked about at the very beginning, where they spend so much time cleaning the house. And the major consequence of a part of the house being taken over is that they have less to clean. So it feels like something that they are protecting and watching over, whatever it is that's being represented, possibly a way of life or a country, I don't know, but something that they're struggling to keep functioning, I suppose.
On the main interpretation, for what I know, it's kind of like protecting a way of life or something from a change as well. But in that case, it doesn't really make sense because they are cleaning but not doing anything. There is a passiveness of them towards the noises. They're not doing anything, but they are cleaning in a way that is really not useful because the dust keeps accumulating.
Keeping status quo, I guess. So that makes a lot of sense. It's not like they are improving anything. They're just fighting to keep it as it is, but maybe they're not being very sensible about it.
What do you think of that meaning stagnation? That unless that we change, everything is meant to be subjected to a sudden change, the noises coming in and taking over everything.
People tend to be reluctant to change. The house, I think, like Varsha said, it represents the status quo rather than a character. It's their environment. They want to keep it as they like it. That's why they were always cleaning. It's almost a compulsion in a sense. It reads like they don't know anything else. That's what they were used to do. So that's what they keep doing, and they kept doing until they couldn't do it anymore. There is a lot of that, especially when you get older. You are very reluctant to change, to adapt, to let even change in, and everything is noise. I was trying to figure out clues for their ages, but I guess they are in like 40s, 50s. There's a mention that somewhere that they reach their 40s, and then so they're not that old. But I kind of get that feeling that they really want things to be as they are. The house is their environment, is their space, and their reason for living almost is to keep it that way. And that's where they feel safe and comfortable.
A bit earlier in the story, before we are told they are about 40s, they say that the brother lost his fiancée and that the lady actually rejected 2 or 3. So they never married. They lost their parents and they continue on that state, completely reluctant to change. The narrator, the brother, he says that he doesn't know why Irene, the sister, actually let go of the voice around her, and it may be because of that reluctance to change that Susana was mentioning.
There's one bit here that just caught my eye when they were talking about that they talk in their sleep. Whenever Irene talked in their sleep, I woke up immediately. But then they say that they avoid thinking.
Oh, it says, whenever Irene talked in her sleep, I woke up immediately and stayed awake. I never could get used to this voice from a statue or a parrot. A voice that came out of the dreams, not from a throat. Irene said that in my sleep, I flailed about enormously and shook the blankets off. That caught my eye too, because statue or parrot? What?
I know. It's like, was this a bad translation? I'm just like, am I missing something here? But it could be like a figure of speech or something. Sometimes those things get lost in translation.
What you say about the noises and that part on the night, they are always quiet and calm during the day. So whatever haunts them at night. That generally happens to people, like you are calm the entire day and suddenly you go to sleep, anxiety drops on you.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels as if there is some emotional baggage that the siblings have that may be undealt with.
I think I misread the bit about noises when I was first reading the story. It says, we seldom allowed ourselves silence there, but when we went back to our rooms or to our living room, then the house grew quiet. So as long as they're in the kitchen, there's a lot of household noises and background noises, and I guess Irene occasionally sings. So there's constantly some noise when they are not in their own rooms. And then when they go to their bedrooms, then it gets super quiet, and that's when they hear everything, including Irene sounding like a parrot, apparently. But the first time I read it as if they were making noise to scare the things away. But what you said makes more sense, that they try for silence, but while they're in the kitchen, they can't help it even. They can't help but make noise, so they allow themselves the noise.
It just occurred to me, they all choose kind of mindless tasks. They are all trying not to think about the problem. Cleaning is an automatic mindless task. Knitting, when you are pretty good at it, I mean, I am a knitter, and I often knit when I'm stressed, when I'm trying to figure something out. It helps me, just the repetition, the sounds, to clear my mind and focus on other things. He, I think he reads and he collects stamps, again, things that can be very immersive, but makes it very easy to shut everything else out. Their days are spent trying to distract themselves from thinking or facing or doing anything outside their little room, their comfort zone, physically and mentally. It does go on about knitting, and if I'm permitted just a little nitpicking here, I don't think he researched knitting very well, because one bit annoyed me, because he was saying that when she didn't like something, she would knit it again, and then just a few paragraphs after, he was saying, well, at least I can read a book more than once. She can't knit the same thing more than twice. Well, you can. I won't recommend do it straight away. You have to wash the yarn and make sure it's straight again. But you can knit the same thing twice.
I really like the image of the ball jumping in the basket as she was knitting. First I was like, what the heck? And then I realized that could happen. I've never knit myself, but yeah, that's such a cute image inserted into everything else in the story.
Yeah, and I think that the point of knitting, as Susana said, that they focus on such mindless things.
Mm-hmm.
And it reinforces that topic of avoidance that we were mentioning before. Like, they have this big thing going on, those noises that they know about. They lost half of the house and they are still knitting. The guy just finds this hobby of finding the stamps and organizing them. And it's like they couldn't find anything more pedestrian to focus their attention on. Rather than dealing with the stuff of the noises, they just do anything else. But
yeah, I guess it's the two possibilities that I guess we're sort of wrestling with now, or at least in my mind, is one, that they are knitting to block out what's going on, which I guess the second one is very similar in that they're doing anything they can to keep normalcy, and this for some reason is their normal. These tasks, their daily routine, whatever it looks like, is their normal, and no matter what's happening in the outside world, they're fighting to keep what they do until they absolutely have to stop.
Very at the start of the story, he mentions that they are in, I think, 1939 in the story set, and the narrator says something like, we can't get anything else during this time, and that's the post-war era, right, where imports were blocked. And he cares so little about the world. It reinforces what you were saying, Varsha, that the only thing that matters is within the house. The rest of the world, the scarcity, the war, it really doesn't matter to them.
Or they're trying to keep it so that it doesn't matter. Whatever they do, if they can feel like they're able to keep up this semblance of normality, this thing from shattering and falling apart, then they can still pretend that everything is okay.
And they have that luxury. So it doesn't go into it, but they were well off financially. So they had no incentive to change, to go out, to go work. They're just very passive. They have their income, they have their house, and that was fine. And when it stopped being fine, they moved on. But you kind of got the impression that they had more than just the house. They weren't just suddenly homeless. Because again, there was no panic. There was a bit of sadness, but there was no panic about being suddenly homeless. They made that choice.
Oh, that made me think of a different thing. This might be related only obliquely, I think, but is it perhaps commentary, or could it be interpreted as the people who have the means to bring about change are choosing to stay passive and not do anything about it, and they're just happy to continue in their trivialities and not bother with things that could be influenced or changed for better, we think?
Yeah, again, it goes back to how people are very reluctant to change. And if the change doesn't affect you directly, as in to a degree where, you out of food and out of shelter, or your children are suffering, it's very easy to let go. That's how things escalate. And before you know it, there's a war breaking out or some big changes. Because it is those who have the means often stay silent, because it is more convenient. It's more convenient to just shut the world, just ignore.
Yeah, and it's also the fact that some societal change will have a different impact in the different layers of society, right? So if these characters are presented as being middle class or even better, because they really have no concerns about money, it's unlikely that they will do anything under any situation. Even when they leave their house, they don't care. As Susana said, it doesn't seem that they will face any scarcity or anything. They just don't care. They are fine. Doesn't matter what happens to the rest of them. And they have that token pity about whoever takes on the house after.
Yeah, just a mild concern. That's it.
I just wanted to say, I don't know, I just had this thought. I'm moving tangentially here, so sorry. But I was just thinking about a conversation we were having last night and how the story could stay relevant to today, and whether, these changes that we can escape. One of my pet hates is social media or artificial intelligence, and whether this thing taken over that we can escape, that is here to stay, is social media or artificial intelligence. And, the testament of the quality of a piece of writing or a piece of art is its relevance over time. And I think you could reinterpret the story in that context of today, and it still works. And actually, I do believe that artificial intelligence is here to stay. I don't know eventually how it will, what's its final version. But yeah, all we can do about it is lock the door and walk away, because this thing is coming, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, even the title, I went and checked the original title, it's fine, but House Taken Over. It's not House Invaded, it's not House Destroyed, it's not House Lost or House Burned, or, it's taken over. It's a very passive thing. It's something that it's almost like, it was involved. In my mind, I have this image of is that the house was just involved by this big blob of something. It was just absorbed into something and taken over. But again, very passive, very slow, and it fits the narrative. And yeah, it adapts to anything, AI, any changes in society, religious, political, ideological. You always start by, please let it stop, let it go away. It's just a phase. People will forget. And then when that doesn't happen, you're still like, okay, I personally, I'm not going to get involved. I'm just going to stay in my world, if you have that option. And it literally needs to be inside your house, knocking your door for you to do something. Most people are like that. So as a psychological piece, it's very good in that regard, because it doesn't need to be political. It's just human psychology.
And another event that it could apply, it's the pandemic, like how some people wanted to pretend that nothing was going to change, that it was fine, that it will just go away, and then everything changed. It's kind of like a warning that it doesn't matter what you do, the change is going to take over, right? It's going to change. You better get your things in place and adapt, or just leave.
Oh, I like that. So I've been thinking about the brother and sister as victims, but I think what you just said, Livia, switches it up to, not exactly, but for lack of a better word, because I can't think of one, perpetrators, right? Like if there's positive change and there's people fighting against it, eventually it might take over, and you have to stop. You have to either leave or accept, I guess. I mean, I was only thinking about them, that might be overstating it a bit, but I was only thinking of them as victims of something bad happening to them. But it could also be that they are people refusing change, positive change perhaps, but that's inevitable. In cases that's inevitable, they don't really have a choice.
I don't think it's positive. I mean, they are pretty much to almost a debilitating degree. They are just minding their own business. that there's nothing to indicate that the change is good. Quite the contrary. It's taking over, it's making noise, it's moving things around, didn't ask their permission, didn't introduce themselves, whatever it they are. I see it as something very invasive to some degree, and I still see them as victims, as misguided, or I don't understand why they don't fight back, why they don't do anything about it. But yeah, they just seem people that are happy minding their own business. And that's the thing. Most change can be intrusive. You have to accept. It doesn't matter if we think AI is a good idea or not. It's here to stay. Let's stay away from some of the more invasive ideologies that rely on others to be reinforced, which I think it's just no. Change should never be imposed, especially to those who are not doing any harm.
When you were discussing, I thought that change has to be inclusive. So it's not only that they are resisting the change, but the noises are not doing anything to bring them on alongside that change, right? Mm-hmm. And it made me think of a personal experience. Like, I remember when I was 12, 15 or over there, I remember my grandparents struggling with technology. Like, they couldn't get into Facebook. It was that age, like early 2000s, and they couldn't get into tech, and nobody was teaching them. And the argument was that they will always tell, teach me. I don't know how to do it. It's too hard. What you were discussing, it made me think of the same thing. Some changes can be too difficult for people who is too ingrained on a particular way of being. The change is going to take over because society changes, but unless we make it inclusive, they are just going to get taken over and expelled out of it rather than kept within the house, right?
I agree that in the story that there are no indications that the change is positive in any way. What I meant was that it could be a positive change that's being interpreted by the brother and sister as being intrusive. And that comes back to what you were saying, both of you, I guess, that and it shouldn't be that way, perhaps, that someone's forced to lose their way of living because they're not becoming one with the crowd or refusing to fight a battle a certain way or so on. But yeah, I meant it as a metaphor that the story could just as easily work the other way. I was thinking negative change, positive influence. Mm-hmm. It could just as easily be the other way around and be exactly interpreted the same way by the others, maybe for a larger or people who are not the brother and sister. It's a positive change. And whether it's good for society as a whole, I suppose it depends what it is and how it's interpreted.
Yeah, but I think if we take that interpretation of inevitable change, I think through history you can see that sometimes change is inevitable, and ideally, yes, it should be inclusive, but in practice it's not. I don't know, you could relate it to back in the 80s in the UK when Margaret Thatcher moved the country from a predominantly industrial steel manufacturer, coal mining, to a more services society. You had all the miner strikes, you had, it's a difficult change because you have to move from one state to another, and some people are going to be left behind. And those, manual workers lost their jobs, and it was very traumatic. But then ideally, as a society, you move on to a better state. You talk about technology, all people are sort of inevitably going to be left behind. I don't know, any sort of change when you move home or, you marry or you have kids or whatever, there are some inevitable changes that are difficult to deal with for certain groups. And I think, like Livia, yes, it should be inclusive, but sometimes it's just not. The only thing I would say about this story is, and Susana alluded to before, is the lack of fightiness. It's the lack of, you can adapt or die, isn't it? And I think maybe I would like to see a bit more of adaptation from the two characters rather than just, like you said, passively knitting or collecting stamps. It seems like a very sort of passive investment of your time.
What we were discussing so far, it felt as if we were all implicitly concerned that the change was imposed, and sometimes it just happens. As José said, it's not inclusive because it just happens.
Yeah, and I think sometimes change happens with an expected consequence. Probably whenever the first internet came about, they did not foresee what would come out of it, isn't it? So sometimes inadvertently you set off in motion a chain of events that culminates into something totally unexpected, and therefore change, sometimes it's organic and spontaneous and inevitable.
Yeah, and I guess that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about being passive and not taking any action to prevent or change what's going on. Even with the cleaning, like we talked about, they aren't doing anything differently. They're happy to let the dust accumulate and then go dust it for 2 hours every day.
No, in a completely different tangent, because I was looking at things. Do you think, or am I just reading too much into things, that there's some incestual suggestions here? This particular line struck me. An invoice concept that the quiet, simple marriage of sister and brother was the indispensable end to a line established in this house by our grandparents. So very family oriented. And then lower, couple paragraphs down. But it's the house I want to talk about. The house and Irene. I'm not important. And he goes on how much he loves to watch her knitting and how she turned out 2 suitors with no particular reason. And, he's kind of protected of her sister, which is normal. But it does seem to go beyond that. It's almost like, the faithful dog, always at her side and helping and amazed by her knitting and the balls rolling over. And, there's something here besides the house. Something why they chose this life and they chose to be in a house with each other this way, some unspoken agreement, because it does comes up a couple of times, and in such a short story, for something to be mentioned more than once, there's always a purpose. Yeah, and it's a bit critical of her, but always in an endearing sort of way. So I wonder if there's something there.
I think that's part of what I mentioned at the beginning about the levels of weird of the story that you've got going on. And I think that's one level of, why are this brother and sister? It's a weird relationship, isn't it? Maybe there is something there about what you mentioned, maybe not. But I think if one of the intents of the story was to make the reader uncomfortable, that would certainly go a long ways to achieving that, alongside everything else that is going on.
I had a more allegorical interpretation of that. If we go back to that idea of brother and sister being a group on society, in many cases, specific classes are called incestuous, not literally, but because they only blend with themselves, right? It's the same people or the same circles all over again. There is no inclusion of somebody different. They just stay within the known people and that's it. And we have seen that happening on classes or on industries. Sometimes you have a very niche industry and the same professionals move over all the different companies, And it gave me, when Susana was reading that, I thought like, perhaps he was not actually writing that literally, but just implying like this tightly knit group that doesn't accept anybody from outside, that doesn't want change, that it's not going to spread, that it's not going to mingle.
It does sound like they had a very serene existence. Their hands like silver sea urchins, needles flashing, and 1 or 2 knitting baskets on the floor, the balls of yarn jumping about. It was lovely. Imagine this afternoon in a very peaceful, just
in the post-war and everything outside, but the house is in a completely different state.
Why would you want to change that? Yeah, of course you want to hold on to that for as long as you can, maybe.
Anything else that you want to discuss?
No, I'm quite happy with this discussion. When I first read it, I was like, I didn't get it. I said, man, I don't get it. What's the point of this? I couldn't see it. And now the more we read and talk about it, and I'm starting to appreciate just the layers and layers, and yeah, pretty good. I'm very glad we did this.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for the incredible and thoughtful discussion. Let's do a round of outros so that the listeners can find you. Susana?
You can find me on page chewing forums and on X as Chronodendron, and my books are available pretty much everywhere. The series is named Timelessness, and the first book is Weird Gods.
José?
I can also be found on the page chewing forums and also on my channel on YouTube at José's Amazing Worlds. Thank you.
Varsha?
I haunt the page chewing forums all the time as well, and you can find me on my YouTube channel, Reading by the Rainy Mountain. The About page has other ways to reach me and links to my podcast.
You will find the links to their channels and spaces in the episode's description. In any case, I love to hear your thoughts on House Taken Over and on the style of the guest talks. Thank you for listening and happy reading.